What's going on YouTube? My name is Chris Avery. Welcome into this new n8n tutorial series where I'm going to be taking a deep dive into specific nodes so that you can really get a grasp of what each node does in order to create some pretty complex workflows down the road. So today we're starting with the basics, the manual trigger node. So let's get right to it. Here we have a blank n8n workflow. Let's just add our first step, and it's going to be this first option here, trigger manually. That's going to be our manual trigger node. So what this one does, it just lets you start your workflow by clicking execute workflow. You don't need to, if you wanted it to run every Sunday and you wanted a scheduled trigger node, that's perfect. But while you are creating the workflow, you're going to want to test it, debug it, and run it multiple times. Change this, run it, change this, run it. So you're going to want to use this and then sub that out later. Additionally, if you're going to be pulling in information from an outside source, but you don't want to have to do that every single time while you're making edits, then do this while you're making it. Switch in, a webhook node later down the road. So that's why you would be using this. Additionally, it's great if you wanted to test small parts of a larger automation. If it's pretty complex and you just want to test, let me just test this small aspect of the workflow. Boom, test it, great. Now let's fit it in with everything else. So that is also something you can do. It's pretty simple. Let's just open it up here. It's going to typically have, it pulls in nothing, and all it does is lets you start the workflow. It's going to output nothing. Settings, you can have it say always output data. So this node will output an empty item if nothing would normally be returned. So for example, if you had a node that required some sort of input in order to just run, for example, the set node, that will need something. Even if it's empty, it just needs something in order to run. This is what it will do. It'll give an empty output, but there will be an output so it can take something and move forward. So that's when you would use the always output data. It's going to be empty, but it's going to be a piece of data that's going to output. Now, execute once. This node will execute only once, no matter how many input items there are. So this is typically going to be important if you're, pretty new to this, or if it's very complex and you think you might have accidentally duplicated or looped in the trigger node. For example, let's say you had an if node. So if this happens, go this route. If this happens, go this route. But one of those routes, you actually linked it to this trigger node again. So it said, if this happens, trigger the workflow again. And then it's going to loop and loop and loop. And obviously that's going to cause problems. This would just say, hey, we're going to execute this trigger node only one time in this workflow. So if an error like that happened, it's not going to, make the workflow go crazy, pretty much. That's just for that one example there. So that's when you could use execute once. All these settings for the manual trigger node are not really necessary. These type of settings are going to be more useful for other nodes. This is such a simple and basic node that you'll see, like retry on fail. This node's not going to fail. It's not bringing in any inputs to make it fail. It's not doing anything to fail unless there's something wrong with your n8n that is limiting it to execute. It's not going to fail. But for example, if you had this on and it did fail, you could say, try 3 times, wait 1,000 milliseconds between each try, and then after those 3 tries, if it failed 3 tries, then we're not going to try anymore. We're going to cut our losses pretty much. But you're not going to need that. It's not going to fail. On error, you're not going to have an error on something like this, but let's go through it. So on error, do you want to stop the workflow? So if there was an error, do you want it just to stop? Say, hey, we had an error, we shut everything down, and then you can figure out what happened and then try again. Do you want to continue? So execution will continue if the node fails. You'd want this if you want to pass the error message as a regular output data so that the next node can do something with that information. Typically something like logging that information, certain notification you want, or if you know this is going to be a very minor issue and you just want to, if an error occurs, it doesn't really matter, you can just skip it, go on to the next one for something like that. And then lastly, continue using error output. You're going to, this one lets you branch out the workflow pretty much. So for successful, runs this way. And then one for errors, it does this. So if you were going to draft an email, if everything before, which in this case is just a execute step, drafts the email, and then if you still wanted it to draft the email, if this had an error, but it would say a different type of email, it would still let you do that. So that's what you can do there. Notes, this is just for you to add reminders, make comments. This is just for yourself to see. Doesn't make any difference in the workflow, doesn't change anything. If you put this is a execute workflow, nothing changes. You'll just see that when you open this up. If you want to see it on the main screen, you can check this off, and then you'll see execute workflow. So that's just for you if you like to, be nice and tidy, keep good notes there. And there we go. And then lastly, if you click on this and press space, you can edit this. I like to edit this, so manual trigger node keeps it clean, keeps it real clean for you. And see, success, boom, because we have this checked off. Continue using error output. And I said if you want it to run one way on a success, run another on an error. Here is exactly what you can do. Success, you go through that workflow. Error, you go through that workflow. Now let me show you an example. This is just a very basic, you execute the workflow and it's going to send you an email. So I'll quickly show you this Gmail send message node. It goes to my email, my work email, the subject's test, and it's going to say testing big dog. So like I said, this is a manual trigger node, so all it does is just starts the workflow when you press execute workflow. So we'll already have one in here, so let me delete this. So this is empty. You can see, boom, success. It's in the inbox, refresh, boom, here's the email. And then if we wanted to send that email every Sunday, we could substitute this out for the scheduled trigger node. But while we were creating this, if we were testing it, doing everything, this manual trigger node is what we would want to use. Okay, well, as you know, that's a pretty basic node to start out with, but thanks for joining on episode 1. Subscribe down below so that you are able to just absorb all this information and be able to start banging out these wicked workflows with me here. If you have any questions about this one, just leave it in the comments below and let me know what other nodes you're going to want to see in the future here. All right, cheers.